Basic definitions. Monogamy, one love. Supposed to be for all time, but rarely happens. Polygamy, one man, many wives. Polyandry, one woman, many husbands. And my favourite, polyamorous, many loves. Or poly for short. And I'm Polly, and both my girlfriends are here today. So it wasn't the Mormons that got me into it. I actually stumbled into the polyamorous life completely by accident with my first relationship. I was 22. I had come out at 19 as a lesbian, despite the fact I hadn't even kissed a woman. But I knew. 2 years later, still nothing happening. Then I met this older woman who was married and with kids. And she was up for it. He was fine with it. I was fine. I was 22. I'd been waiting a long time. And they all knew. And it was an incredible way to start your sexual life, I think. In fact, we all got on so well, her husband built on a room for me. And I really liked it. I found it very natural. I loved the honesty that was involved and how they'd both sorted out in their relationship what they wanted and needed and were able to talk about it honestly. And I found it very hard after that to go back to monogamy. To go back to the world of, jealousy and possessiveness and who's that on the phone? It does not sit with me. It does not sit with me at all. And actually, my first lover too, I think, had the best definition of how the polyamorous world works. Because I was very young and, I just figured out how to have sex thanks to her. So, I was eager to try with more people. And her line to me was, I don't care where you go, what you do, as long as when you come back, that twinkle is in your eye. And I still think that's the best grounds, the best thing. Anyway, now, I discovered too that I'm not jealous by nature. I really don't get it, especially after that introduction. Why, if I care for someone, if they're off having fun, why does that hurt me? I'm happy. She's having great. It means I've got more time to sit by myself and read books, which is what I like to do most of the times. And what is more powerful? Keeping someone on such a short leash that they can't stray, or letting them go and knowing they'll be back. Maybe it takes a certain amount of Dutch arrogance to be polyamorous, but really, how could anyone find someone better than me? And I think we all assume that monogamy is just the way it is, that it's natural and it's the way it's been done for millennia. And it's just not true. Monogamy is cultural. It is not natural. And really, we don't even live in a strictly monogamous world. Monogamy is a lifetime partnership. And that rarely happens these days. We live in a world of serial monogamy. Sounds like a crime, and it should be. And there's a book that's just come out. It's called Sex at Dawn, The Prehistoric Origins of Modern Sexuality, by a guy called Christopher Ryan and Casilda Jetha. And in publicising the book, he was quoted as saying, monogamy is as deeply and profoundly unnatural as foot binding and head flattening. And Dr. Tatiana, are you familiar with Dr. Tatiana? Sex Advice to All Creation, the definitive guide to the evolutionary biology of sex. Very fascinating book. She describes monogamy as the rarest and most aberrant evolutionary phenomenon. Because what the thinking is now these days, because we've really had to question all our assumptions about monogamy, not just in our species, but in every other species as well. For a long time, naturalists would talk about monogamous species, swans and all these different things. And then in the 1980s, they got access to genetic testing. And to their great surprise, they discovered that none of these monogamous species were monogamous. They now use the term socially monogamous to cover the fact that a lot of the chicks aren't from the purported father. And actually, some people knew that before the 80s. In one of Jared Diamond's books, he talks about a study that was done in a teaching hospital in America in the 1960s. A very modern, middle-class hospital with lovely, proper middle-class clients coming in, and they decided to do a study on how blood types come down through families. And they started collecting the data. And to their horror, they discovered that up to a quarter of the children were not their fathers. and they hid the results. Just put them in a drawer, put it aside, never spoke about it again, because people couldn't take that, because it's just so shocking. So shocking. So the current thinking now is how our sexuality evolved. For starters, we have to talk about how things happened with the hunter-gatherer part of our lifestyle, because that is still 99% of human history is hunter-gatherer. We've only been in cities and having farms for 1% of our history. And they think the way it worked back in the Neolithic is that, yes, there was a tribe, but there were distinct bands. You know, the women hang out together, the men hang out together, the kids hang out together and supervised by the others. And they think that men and women came together to help with child rearing, but that it would only last 3 to 4 years, basically until the kid was old enough to run with the pack. And it was pretty much separate and egalitarian, and, you know, we shared everything, possibly including lovers. So even back then it was serial monogamy, you know, but still cheating, let's assume it. So not only is monogamy not been the rule for all that time, but marriage and the nuclear family are also not as long and gloried as one would think, reading the propaganda now. There is a clue in the very name, nuclear family. Sounds a bit modern. Sounds a bit 20th century. Doesn't sound like a medieval term, and it's not. Some people have actually theorized that really the nuclear family was only invented in the 20th century. Before that time, rich people had servants, nannies, tutors, all that lot, and poor people, 3 generations in one house, all sharing the load. It wasn't until the 1950s, after World War II, that we started expecting mum, dad and the kids all in separate houses, the nuclear family. And it's very lonely and hard. It's a lot of work. All the, you know, housekeeping and the going out and maybe working 2 jobs to get the money and raising the kids, that's too much work for 2 people. Wouldn't it be nice to have a 3rd or a 4th around to help carry the load? And even marriage is not as wonderful and as long-lasting as we have been told. For more than half of the Christian church's existence, they didn't have a wedding ceremony. They frowned on marriage, didn't want a bar of it. Because it says in the Bible somewhere that Jesus said, you know, there are people standing here who will not taste of death before the kingdom of God returns. And so they were fully expecting Christ to come back in their lifetimes. And so, no, don't get married. If you can't be celibate for this amount of time, you know, you're weak. Celibacy was preferred. It was only much later that people started getting married, and usually they were married by pagan priests, not the Christians. In fact, the Christians didn't get a wedding ceremony until the 14th century. And even then, it wasn't in the church. It was a blessing on the steps of the church, because they didn't want the couple to pollute the church with lust. Yes, very different now, isn't it? And that sort of accidentally brings me into quoting, God help me, Jane Fonda. She actually had something very good to say on this topic. Back in the 80s, she got divorced from Tom Hayden. They'd been together something like 17 years, and it was an amicable divorce, and at the end she was quoted as saying, "Look, when the marriage vows were written, average life expectancy was 35. We've had a life together. Ready for a new one." And that's something that has not been taken into consideration at all, that the conditions that surround marriage have changed completely. Marriage should change as well. Maybe it's time to put in, you know, an interval, a half-time break, a free pass for a weekend, something, you know, just to mix it up a bit and keep things interesting. It was never designed for people to be together, just them, for 60 or 70 years. It's wrong, I tells you. Wrong. And I believe that all aspects of sexuality are on a continuum or a spectrum, even gender. I don't think there's just 2 genders. I think there's about 7, actually, because honestly, if Kylie Minogue was standing here next to me, I mean, really? Same gender? Isn't that stretching a definition just a bit too far? Okay, and then we know from the Kinsey report in the 60s too that sexual preference is a continuum as well. 10% mostly gay, 10% mostly straight, and everyone else sort of a mix in between. which no one really ever wants to come to grips with. The fact that most of us are to some extent bisexual, because, ooh, don't the bisexuals get it from both ends of the scale? They get the whole, you pick a bloody side, you traitor. In my worldview, bisexuals are wonderful. They're like Lego connector strips that you can make much bigger constructions with. Maybe that's just me. And I also think there is a spectrum too when it comes to monogamy versus promiscuity. And again, I think it's probably a small percent completely monogamous, a small percent total harlots, and everyone else a mix in between. And I'm not saying monogamy can't work, but I think it's a small percentage of people who can truly find someone that they want to spend the rest of their lives together happily, joyfully, creatively, and good on them. But why are we trying to squeeze everyone into that box? We don't fit. I tried on a stereotype once and it cut around my shoulders, and never again. I will warn you though that the thing I have learned, because I've been talking about non-monogamy, which I called it for a long time, for about, must be good 16 years now. And the things I've discovered from talking about it on stage and with other people is it provokes a very strong response in people. If they've never heard about it before and you start talking about it, it's either intense, deepest loathing or surprised delight, and not much in between. And the other things, the downsides I can tell you about is that no one will support you except other poly people. Your straight friends, your family, even most of your queer friends, possibly not some of the gay ones, will not support you. They won't get it, they won't understand it, they will look for division and friction because they don't seem to want to see it succeed. Being polyamorous also requires a shitload of honesty, and that can be quite painful and hard going at times. And although you may not have to deal with sexual jealousy, there is a thing called time jealousy, where there are issues about, you know, who sleeps where, when, for how long, who's spending more time. That can get a little bit boring at times too. And sadly, I think the truth about not just polyamory, but all sorts of ways to try and control, edit or manage love is that love will always elude rational control because love is not rational. You can make as many rules and laws as you like and it'll always squeak through. The only thing you can do is a thing called new relationship energy, or NRE for short, that when you get together, it's ding, bing, 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 I must have them, I must die. If I don't have them, oh, it's all too much, it's wonderful, wonderful. It doesn't last forever. And when it happens, and maybe someone in your group, you just have to let them go for a bit. It'll burn out like a fever. It may take a few months, but you know, eventually you'll be able to get back to a bit of sanity. Now, despite all that, I am still convinced that polyamory beats monogamy hands down. I would never go back to monogamy. I like the honesty. The opposite, going back to the monogamous world, the lying and the cheating and the sneaking around behind the backs, whatever people say about the thrill of the chase and forbidden fruit, it's crap. It's just lying and cheating. I won't have a bar of it. There are pros, though, many pros to the polyamorous lifestyle. There's nothing more fun than cruising at a party with a friend and going, hey, what do you reckon? Oh, might be in jail. And because love is so dangerous, it's really good to have a buddy system in this situation. You know, it's good to cruise with someone to get your back in case things get weird. It's lovely to be able to discuss new attractions with your partner and not have to censor that. And sometimes you can even share new attractions. And that, my friends, is mind-blowing, because then you finally discover the only way you can get away. You know, when you're newly in love and all you want, oh, but she's so wonderful and she's so gorgeous, and oh my God, oh my God. And your friends get bored very quickly. But if someone is feeling the same thing, you can go at it for hours. No one's going to stop you. Not having to censor my thoughts. The psychic relief of that is just wonderful, and that ties in with the next thing I'd say is one of the things I think I hate most about monogamy is how you have to amputate your life when you break up with someone. You just have to cut that whole section out, never refer to it again, it's like it never happened, you can never talk about your exes with future partners, and you lose whole chunks of your life. And I hate that. And the possibilities really are endless, and they're all up for you to construct as you wish. And it all starts with a conversation. And this is part of what I think of as the public service part of this speech that I do, in that this, for you people, is a perfect opportunity to raise the topic. No one gets the blame for bringing it up first. You can, either it's, oh, that was a load of nonsense, wasn't it? Or, that was interesting. So use this opportunity, because unlike monogamy, there is no formal structure that everyone has to fit into with polyamory. There are so many different ways to organise your, lives. Basic 2 rules. What happens out of town stays out of town. That's the most basic model. Then you could have everyone sort of living together, moving between homes. You could have a whole list of like permanent, part-time or casual lovers, people who float in and out as things change around them. Blended families with friends. Oh, so nice to have more adults around to look after the kiddies. I'm sorry, I think that's better for kiddies than the lying and cheating and the breaking up and the shredding of lives. And line marriage, which is an interesting one, where basically, one couple starts it, and then they get someone else in, who then get someone else in who's a bit younger, and you just sort of have this production line. The old ones drop off the perch, and the new ones come in here. An everlasting marriage. How cool's that? Construct your own. Now, oh yes, good. I'll leave time for questions. I want to finish with 2 common misconceptions and 1 regular criticism that I get when I talk about this. I mentioned before I have 2 girlfriends, and I've talked about it on stage many times, and yet so many times the first question people ask when I come off stage is, do they know about each other? I'm talking about it on stage! How dumb would I have to be to keep them both in the dark? The other assumption I really hate is that if you're not monogamous, oh, you're up for it all the time. With anyone, just anyone off the street. No, this is not the 70s swinging key parties crap that people want to bring up when they're talking about polyamory. It actually, I think, raises the bar, because when you're already in a couple of wonderful relationships, you're not just going to do any skank who wants to. You pick and choose more, and the bar goes up. And if they leap it, oh man, that's exciting. And then the final comment, one that really bugs me, when disapproving people look at me, and after I've talked about all this stuff, and they just go, you just want to have your cake and eat it too. And I think it's important to ask here, what is the purpose of cake? Except to be eaten. If you just have your cake and you do not eat it, it goes stale and mouldy and you have to chuck it out. I say, have your cake, eat your cake, bake another bloody cake. Thank you very much.